Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. So thanks for being here for today's presentation of our Alumni Speaker Series featuring Don Komarechka, class of 2009. We will begin today's event the way we begin all events here at Georgian, and that's with our Indigenous Land Acknowledgement. Georgian College acknowledges that all campuses are situated on the traditional land of the Anishinaabe people. The Anishinaabe include the Odawa, the Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. Georgian College is dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture and committed to moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation and respect with all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. Well, good afternoon once again. We are here to welcome Don Komarechka to speak to us today about some really incredible work that he's been doing since graduating from Georgian College. My name is Jamie Campbell, and I'm the manager of alumni engagement here at Georgian. And I want to welcome each of you here today. A special welcome to our president and CEO, Kevin Weaver, for joining us. We also have Diane here from Johnson Insurance, and Johnson is the preferred home and auto insurance provider of the Alumni Association. And they have Johnson has generously sponsored today's event, helping to bring Don here from Bulgaria, and they've also sponsored the delicious treats at the back of the room. So for the folks that are here with us in person, enjoy, and for those of you that are watching virtually, know that there are treats here, so feel free to come out in person for the next one. We also want to thank Kelly Watson, a director here from the Siegel International Center, who is also a sponsor of today's initiative, and thank them for helping to bring Don here to Canada. So for those of you that are attending an Alumni Speaker Series for the first time, you're in for a real treat. We launched these about 3 years ago, and they're designed to highlight graduates from Georgian College who are doing great things out in the world. They come in to talk about the impact they're having, about the differences that they're making, and really they're truly some of the best graduates that we've produced, and Don is no exception. We'll be celebrating him at the Premier's Awards in less than a week now, Monday. So more to come on that. But before we get started, obviously, we want to talk a bit about Don, who he is, and about some of his accolades. So, Don is a graduate of Georgian's advertising program, class of 2009. He is an internationally recognized macro, and landscape photographer and the owner of Komarechka Photography Limited. His work pushes against the technical limitations of camera equipment and physical limitations of light itself, that has been featured in projects around the world, including, but I will say not limited to, because it's a long list, including but not limited to the Royal Canadian Mint and The Nature of Things with David Suzuki, and through projects with the BBC, Discovery Channel, and National Geographic. He's been published in the Canadian Journal of Physics and the Canadian Journal of Microbiology. Again, just to name a few. He's also published multiple books, and we have 2 copies of his book here today called Macro Photography, The Universe at Our Feet. And for those of you that are here in the room today, we'll be doing a prize draw for 2 of those books at the end of the session, and Don will personalize those for you, and we'll of course snap a photo. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the mic over to Don. For the folks on the call, please feel free to use the Q&A feature throughout the presentation, and we'll answer questions following the presentation.
Thank you, Jamie. I guess if we could get the lights dimmed slightly on the screen, we can have a bit more fun with the presentation element. But the life of a photographer, what would you think that a photographer does? Take pictures, obviously, but that's a very small percentage of what I do. And the bigger picture is, well, yes, of course, making pictures. I'm known for my work with snowflakes. There's a lot of painstaking effort involved in creating these images. A lot of my work has a scientific bend to it. And we're going to talk a little bit about how these images come to be. But then we're going to talk about how the life of a photographer transitions when you decide to move onto a different continent, and when you have very real world issues that you can use your art to take action with. It's going to be a fun talk. I'm located in Varna, Bulgaria. That's home base for me these days. If you're unfamiliar with where it is, we'll talk on that in a little bit, but it is a beautiful country with 7 mountain ranges, a coastline, and some of the most beautiful scenery that you've seen, and a culture that has been able to come back from more than half a millennia of Ottoman rule to become its own nation again. It's some really wonderful stories about that, and we'll talk a bit more about it as we go through. We'll also talk about the support that I've been doing for Ukraine in the last, well, since February, when the international community has started to help them in their existential fight. But let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back to photography. And one of the things that really helped me in my career was to think sharing, to think that anything that I can do, somebody else out there could probably do it the same or better, but I can gain some level of merit by showing people exactly how I did it. And I shouldn't care if people followed exactly in my footsteps to recreate images like this. Now, this is a blade of blue fescue, just bluegrass, that has a powder-like coating. Now that's hydrophobic. So water doesn't just turn into like a sheen on it, it feeds up. And it can create water droplets that the more spherical they are, the more they act like lenses. They refract an image of flower that's placed in the background. This is done on my kitchen table around Easter time because there's an Easter basket in the background in a casserole dish that I got from Value Village. And you know, it's so down to earth when you see how these things get put together and you see, wow, I can do this too. It makes it approachable. It makes people try to experiment and have fun and make mistakes, yes. But that approach is so helpful for me to illustrate exactly how, this I just shot last week, right before I came here. And yeah, I've got some interesting tools, these gooseneck arms on these platforms and some lights and all that. But I'm suspending a yellow goat's beard seed. I used to collect them from the Barrie waterfront. We would just go for a walk down there in summer, and we'd get these giant poof balls. And they've got these little spider web-like things, and lo and behold, you can make some magic with that and a vine from a passion flower plant. This behind-the-scenes approach, I think, has been a paramount to my success. Take a look at this setup. This was my backyard in Barrie. I'm going to make some freezing soap bubbles here. Simple flashlight, well, it's a big flashlight, but it's just a light. Beaming through what is a sheet of, just a magnifying sheet, a Fresnel lens, that goes to create a freezing soap bubble like this. Now that's in regular exposure. If I expose for the bubble, and then I crop in on that, you get something that looks like this. And they'll freeze solid in about 10 seconds. And when I was making images like this, I was working on a BBC project and a number of episodes of Forces of Nature, which they had, it's been a while now since that came out, probably 8 or 9 years. But they had initially enlisted me to do snowflake photography and some time-lapse stuff, and they had a big shot list. But they were in Norway, and one of the things on their list was to photograph freezing soap bubbles. They knew that I had done it. They asked me how, and I gave them a detailed approach. I gave them behind-the-scenes images, and I gave them every point of failure that they might encounter and how they might get around that. And they said, oh, why don't you just do it? And so I sent them some examples of footage that I had shot, I don't know, 400 different attempts of, and they had utilized one in this opening sequence. If it plays, come on, play. This is like the moment where things should not fail. And it fails. And I press this button. Oh, that stops it. That goes to the end. Or no, we tried to play it, it didn't. All right, well, I've stolen my own thunder. That was the opening sequence of the Forces of Nature documentary series that used freezing soap bubble video footage. And it's not very impressive. But let's go on to some other behind-the-scenes stuff that really gives an illustration of once people know how something is made, they might have more or less appreciation for it, but at least it becomes more real. So there's a leaf. I have placed that leaf carefully on that rock. I will take full blame for that. But I'm at a distance with a long exposure, and that turns into an image that looks like this. And that was on a magazine cover at one point in, where was that? Maine. It's not a United States image, but they don't care that much. I've done a lot of work with snowflakes. They look like this when they come out of the camera. 4 hours of work turns them into something like this. And I decided to write about that process in a step-by-step tutorial that ended up getting me my first cover shot on Outdoor Photography Canada magazine. Being able to tell the process is a huge step towards success. I've had a number of covers from them. Unfortunately, like a lot of magazines, they've had to close their doors. But this cover, this was shot using a Pringles can as a light modifier. And so I attached a Pringles can to my camera splash and used that to direct the light right above the subject. And printed map of the Earth from NASA's public domain archives. You just put these pieces together, and it doesn't take a lot to make magic happen. And I've been on other covers too. Hey, look at this one. That's a Georgian view. In the same month, I was also inside Discover magazine. So that was a good month. But I go back to that idea of those snowflakes. And I've done so many of these. They are amazing. They are always changing. You never find the same one twice. And I've got an archive of nearly 1,000 edited snowflakes, over 1,000 unedited. This is one I'm going to show you. I was working on this one for 14 hours this past week, and it's going to be a part of a snowflake series that I debut every December 1st. Now that whole snowflake, if you look at it, it's kind of weird looking. It's not as symmetrical as you might expect them to be. They are all very unique, and it's quite symbolic. That symbolism gets noticed too. When you do something in a unique way, people have photographed snowflakes for, I don't know, Wilson Bentley was doing it in the late 1800s in a farmhouse in Vermont. It's not new, but the way I was doing it, using reflected light from tiny slices of focus, combining them together, that was new. And that got noticed by a lot of people, including the Royal Canadian Mint, who has issued 2 coins with my snowflake images on them, limited edition $20 pure silver coins. And I am very humbled by that honor. But as you keep doing something and you get better and better at it, it doesn't stop. You know, you get to discover some really weird things. And I've talked to some of the best physicists that have studied crystal structures to figure out how some of that happens. And I'm not going to describe it to you. I barely understand it, but it's amazing to see how optical interference, the same physics that would put a rainbow on a soap bubble or an oil spot, can make beautiful rainbows inside of snow. And would you believe that this is also a snowflake, a rare variety, double terminated arrowhead crystal, the first time anyone was ever photographed with reflected light. There's value to that. The more you try, the more interesting things you're going to discover. And then you can write about it at length, which, you know, we've got the book that was crowdfunded very successfully and came out with production ending through the pandemic when I had a 5-year-old child taking virtual kindergarten under my attention, trying to finish writing a book at the same time. It's not an easy process, but I did it. And so the whole process is outlined in the book. And all of these processes are, including some really fun ones, because when you are producing your own book, you'll put things in there that no publisher would ever let you, including a section on stereoscopic 3D. And I've got a fun experiment. Might be difficult to do here. Maybe somebody can get this to work. Maybe it might be easier if you're further at the back of the room. This is a stereoscopic 3D image compare. So experiment time. If you cross your eyes such that the images overlap and you see 3, so that you see 1 in the middle, then you will see this jump out at you in stereoscopic depth, the way that you've probably never seen anything before. Not everybody can do it. In fact, even if you try hard, 50% of the population can't. If anybody can see it that is chiming in virtually, they might be shouting with glee. At least one person in the room got it. Hooray, 2. There. It's fun. And that's just part of the adventure. And there's lots of adventures with photography. So I'm going to go over 3 primary adventures. Show of hands, how many people actually got that to work? More than 4. I think that's a record. But the adventures that we go on, they can go all over the place. They've taken me to the mountaintops in the Yukon, out with a group of hunters. I was related to one of them, and I don't own a gun, but I can shoot with a camera, and so I did. But I get to take behind everybody else, and especially when we are, a line of 6 ATVs long, and I'm at the end, and I look like that. It's not a great look, but it shows I was really in the thick of the adventure. And while I don't hunt, the hunters were doing their thing, and they got moose. And I thought, how can I frame their activities with my activities and make something iconic with that. They love this quite a bit. I made them all prints of that. And I'm there with tons of camera gear. I shoot in all sorts of different conditions. This is an infrared photograph, light that we can't even see with our own eyes to add additional contrast and texture to a scene. And there's stories to be told up there, stories that date back to World War II. They built a pipeline from Norman Wells in the Northwest Territories down to Anchorage, Alaska, and that passed through Yukon. When they backed out of there, rather than spending fuel to take all the vehicles out, they just lined them all up and left them. So there's massive vehicle graveyards up in the northern Yukon wilderness, a wilderness that is a host to these beautiful scenes. One of the most beautiful parts of Canada that I've ever been to. No offense to Ontario. Ontario's cool too, but there's some beautiful places when you can try to see, you know, what looks like fire, but it's a sunset. And you get to share these moments of seeing. There's a longer story about how this bird was caught eating the rump of a moose floating in a lake. But that's a really long story. So I'll just show you this beautiful people. But while the hunters are all almost sleeping, getting up, starting to make coffee, I'm out firing off thousands of shots in the back window of a pickup truck because it had these beautiful frost formations on it. Fleeting as they are, it's wonderful to capture those moments if you know to look for them. And it's important to put yourself in the position too. You know, it's helpful as a storytelling element, as a where and why and how and what you're seeing from that moment when the camera is capturing it. This image I find almost as valuable, maybe even more so, as this one here that the actual camera was taking. So it's storytelling. It's bringing people into the experience where you are. And while I can do that in Canada, I can also do that in the Rodopi Mountains. Bulgaria is my home now, has been for over a year. My wife is Bulgarian, and we have a daughter who absolutely loves it. Jealous that she's learned a very complex language, like snapping her fingers. I can't do that, but you've got the mountain ranges. This is where it is, by the way, in case you're unfamiliar with Eastern European geography. Unfortunately, many people are more familiar with it now than they used to be last year. But it is a part of the European Union, it is a NATO member, and it is on the coast of the Black Sea. Being that it has 7 mountain ranges, you get a lot of waterfalls, a lot of stunning hiking landscapes where you can just see the most pristine elements of nature. But with mountains and flowing water through the mountains, you also get a lot of caves. And caves are, I mean, yes, we have caves in Ontario, but they're not like this. That's the Devitashka Cave. If anybody saw The Expendables 2, they actually filmed part of that movie in this cave. And the funding of that movie actually afforded the government to build a bridge to it, which now makes it accessible to average people without hiking a kilometer through very dense brush. We didn't know they built the bridge. So we know now. When you get there and you see the bridge, it's like, aha, where it is. There's lesser known caves like the God's Eyes Cave, which is this beautiful cave in the middle of absolutely nowhere that has 2 giant holes looking through, back up to the sky. And to create the flare like that, I knew I could use my camera gear in a special way. The flare is normally not a component, but using an infrared camera, all of the optical coatings on the lenses designed to remove flares are based on the light we see, not on other light. So the technical know-how comes in and I get working on some ideas and I come up with this. But then there's the Balkan Mountains, one of the most vast landscapes that is so scary to drive through because they made those roads with guardrails that eroded some decades before that were never replaced. Better now, but the first times were quite tragic, and a lot of it's decaying in these mountains. One that I find is a wonderful storytelling component here is this particular structure. It's called Buzulja, rolls right off the tongue. It is the former Communist Party headquarters, or a monument to the Communist Party during the Soviet era, and was built in the early 80s and became abandoned in the early 90s. And it sits atop a mountain that was a strategic location where the Russians freed the Bulgarians from the Ottoman Empire. And they built it there to show that friendship during the Soviet times. The story's longer. Bulgaria was going to become a puppet state of Russia, which is why they liberated them. That never happened because A lot of stuff that Russia tries to do these days doesn't work out so well for them. But we visited this place a number of times. That graffiti was painted over the second time. And the guy that was spray painting Enjoy Communism and the Enjoy Coca-Cola font was actively doing it when we were there. And we asked him now, because our gateway in, which was this opening here, has now been closed. And he said, no, it's not a problem. Let's go around the side. You'll find this little hole right here. Just going through there. Easy. Okay, so we do, as one does. And we go back into the basement of this room. And the reason why I'm showing you this is because when we go up either of the staircases on either side, the main room of this building is one of the most beautifully destroyed structures in the world. It's just been left to the elements, to looters, to everything else. And to stand there and look at this forgotten history, it's remarkable. And you see it decay, right? You go to the outer rim where all those windows are, and those beautiful fresco mosaics telling stories are just left to the elements and battered, and you can see them falling apart on the ground. This is, it's a tragedy of a lot of things from the era where, you know, when one regime changes, everything about them wants to be almost abandoned and completely forgotten. And then the cycle repeats because the lessons weren't properly learned and cemented in history. But we were looking at that building. And by the way, I should say, we were the only people there. I met more English-speaking people inside the structure than I did anywhere else in the country because it was something of a tourist attraction. But when we were inside, there was a guy from New Zealand there. And he said, all right, well, we'll see you later. We're going to go up the tower. You barely see the tower in this image, but you can see it a bit better from this greater distance. And I asked him, like, oh, well, how do you get there? It's like, don't just follow me if you want. And I said, is it safe? It's like, well, do you plan on falling? So we go, and it's a concrete coffin of 27 flights of stairs to go all the way up to the top. And when you get near the top, you see that star, that red star. And how symbolic is to have that broken, shattered red star of communism looking out over the beautiful landscape that has survived it and the culture that has been revived as a result of that. Now, I don't plan on falling, but my plans put me in very precarious positions. And so I was trying to get a good picture, and I ended up getting a pretty decent one that illustrated the landscape and the star and the structure and the story. And the story is an important element to have here. A lot of my work has been done with nature photography, right? I do the landscape stuff as you've seen, but photographing in my backyard, whether it's something that is completely documentary, like photographing a leafcutter bee, to something completely inventive, like photographing a freezing soap bubble, or even further inventive, photographing a freezing soap bubble fluorescing under ultraviolet lights, so it is its own light source and glowing. I don't have enough time to go down that particular rabbit hole, but it is something that is a lot of fun. If I take a look at this gooseneck loosestrife, it's a bit invasive, but it's a beautiful flower in our backyard here in Barrie. If I turn out the lights and I turn on some ultraviolet flashlights on it, it looks like this. It's an amazing transformation of what you can do just in your own backyard, not necessarily in far off lands. Same thing was true of sunflowers. Sunflowers, I believe, are in the buttercup family, and most of those flowers, when you put the ultraviolet lights on them, they take on a bit of a different presentation. And this is also an interesting one because you see a lot of yellows and blues in there. Those are the national colors of Ukraine. And it's also the national flower of Ukraine. So I posted this one in February. And I thought, you know, what if I did a series? A series of images that supports Ukraine. It would be in the public domain, so anybody could use them for any purpose whatsoever. And the idea would be to raise funds to support the refugees that would be coming from Ukraine into Bulgaria, and I could go and do something about it. So I started with some simple setups. I went to my daughter's craft drawer, and I took some of her construction paper, yellow and blue, and I put it together, and you can just barely see it right here. That is a dandelion seed with a droplet of water placed on top of it. That turned into this. And that was the first image in that particular series. I still see it around. People use it as profile photos on social media all the time. And I've seen it end up in articles associated with support, and that was fun. Didn't stop there, though. That was, as soon as I saw the response, I started getting more creative. This one required me to use super glue to glue those flower petals together because they wouldn't stick together in that proper orientation and then dangle a droplet there. Those droplets are placed with that hypodermic needle. You ever come to my studio and you see a used hypodermic needle sitting on the desk? It doesn't mean what you think it means. And that series continued in many ways, using all of the skills that I had built as a photographer. This one with a spray bottle to get most of the water droplets, but then the needle to place a big one down in the middle to create this beautiful piece of artwork. I mean, I'm biased. I think it's beautiful. It's mine. So the water droplet work came through from completely different lines of thinking and work into support this project. And so too did my work with ultraviolet fluorescence. You can buy fluorescing inks. Go down to Curry's. I'm sure they'll have some. It's where I bought a bunch of them in Canada before. And you've got a beautiful symbol instead of a Gerbera daisy, not a sunflower, mind you, but that symbolism can be made. I decided to actually grow sunflowers from seed, as I knew that this war was not going to stop anytime soon. This is an Italian white sunflower that when it blossomed and fluoresced, it fluoresced very distinctly in the yellow and blue colors that we were after. And I got to thinking to some other long-term projects based on other experiments that I had done before, and I go down these rabbit holes. This is the Ukrainian triza, their coat of arms, that I cut out of a piece of felt. Why would I do that? So that I could soak it in some dish detergent. Why the heck would I do that? To place it in a bowl of cream, milk cream. Okay, I'm sounding slightly insane at this point. Under the cream was injected beneath the surface yellow and blue fluorescent inks that I had from the previous project. The detergent is going to cause a reaction with the milk, and it's going to cause the fluorescent ink to come up and around and swirl all around the shape. And that would look like this. So that was fun. I had no idea if that experiment was going to work, but it did. And so the experiments continue in many different ways. How can you support a cause with art? Well, this one was by creating some citric acid crystals on a microscope slide and adding a color modifier behind it, but also cross-polarizing the light to create other colors. My studio table is always a mess. It's always filled with these types of experiments. And you know, some of them work, some of them don't, but I like this one. And again, I've robbed my daughter's craft drawer many times. Here's another example where I placed a flower in front of a book that has a bunch of little circular mirror things that you can flip back and forth to different colors. And they happen to be blue and yellow. I actually bought it from the store that way because I knew I would eventually steal it for this purpose. And I put a flower in the foreground, and using some antiquated optics that have interesting background artifacts called bokeh, I was able to turn the specular highlights off of the background into this beautiful surreal background connecting everything together with the flower still in focus. So that inventiveness, I like to think that I started with here in Georgian College. I'm a graduate of the advertising program, and out-of-the-box thinking was always something super important to understand how your message could possibly differentiate, how your communication could be seen in a different way, in a different context that wouldn't get lost in the noise. So I had an idea. The idea came from 3D printing and that triza, that coat of arms. I decided to make this. It's about 30 centimeters, 12 inches tall. And it's designed to cut bread dough. Had it 3D printed. There is my dough cutter. So I could create bread in the shape of the Ukrainian coat of arms. There it is in my wood-fired oven, my backyard in rural Bulgaria. And there is symbolism for Ukraine. Bread is a big deal for them. It's a big deal for a lot of cultures. And this is as symbolic as it could be to their national identity. So I spent a whole day baking bread in a traditional wood-fired oven. And there I am, wearing almost the same clothes, delivering it to the Ukrainian refugees at the refugee center. And they were speechless. I mean, if you arrived from your country under siege and you get to the center where they have the first aid that you're going to receive, and you receive your national symbol on bread for you to eat and enjoy, you feel loved. I did that a few times. We did more than that. This one, I think this photo ran in Georgia with you, actually. I sent it to Jamie at one point. We did a lot of these. Bags of, I don't know what was in this one, but just about anything a family could need. From baby supplies to food to some art supplies for the kids. You know, they got to get distracted from what's going on. We did it a lot. This is not all of it. We transferred more aid than my car was worth 4 times over. A lot of it that was donated just to me as a random individual, not a charitable organization. I am not accountable to anybody. I could have bought a new car with it. But we went and we bought all of the aid to support them in many ways. When the refugees got sorted, the logistical nightmares of this massive influx of people from a country of 44 million people, when the local government started to get a handle on it, we started to deliver other things. We would ask, what do you need in Ukraine? And when they said, how about a generator? Well, you went to the store, we bought that Daewoo generator, and then in the picture below, there it is with deliveries in the Izium region when it was the front lines. And I'm so glad we did, because generators right now, when Russia is bombing the heck out of the Ukrainian electrical system to freeze them to death, a generator is a really helpful thing to have. When I get back, I'll be making more funds to get more of those out there. It really makes you feel like you're doing something helpful when you can see exactly where that goes. All because of a series of images that were designed with my artistic skills, my, I guess my education from Georgian College to think outside the box, and my desire to move overseas where I realize I can be closer to a problem and therefore I can help it. There's another one of my favorites from that series. Again, a vine and a yellow goat's beard seed. Those 2 things go together so wonderfully. Sometimes it's about just discovering, right? It's just seeing from a different point of view, a different perspective. Understanding that your perspective is not the only one out there, and to see something from an entirely different angle that you otherwise would never see. Sometimes it's about creating that perspective yourself, to create that message that you could not find in nature, that you would not be able to express yourself with in any other way. But with the skills that you've got and the creativity that you can hone, you can make some magic. It's just dandelion seeds in a bowl of water. That's all it is, with a flower in behind. But you put the ingredients together in the right way and it can be magical. Or it's discovering an unusual reality. It's there, it's right under your nose. Something that you might not understand, that you might never normally see. But again, turning the lights off and turning on a different light, seeing things literally in a different light can be the way to revolutionize the way you perceive things. And that has been my goal, my life of a photographer. Thank you very much. I never know how long is long enough and how many stories I'm going to tell. But we do have time for questions at this point. At the back, Barb.
Is there any way that we can help you Ukrainian people?
Yes. Yeah, you can send me an email. You can get in touch. My website address is right up there. Again, I'm not a charitable entity. You're trusting me. So you're not getting a tax receipt. But you can, and you know, we've put in money to provide some thermal drones, which is really helpful, you know, to protect people at night, especially when the temperature's dropping. They make all the more difference right now. And to, I remember they asked for surgical sponges, and we had to import them from the Czech Republic, and we bought like 400 gigantic surgical sponges so that when people needed medical care immediately in the field, they had those ready. So stuff like that is sort of what our game is now. If anybody wants to help, more than welcome. Any other questions? Yeah.
When you mentioned the snowflakes, you were talking about having to spend about 14 hours on some of those. What's in that 14-hour space?
So the editing process is complicated because every snowflake is a tiny slice. And I can go back in the presentation and find one of those slices. I had detailed it earlier on this one. So that is a slice of focus. You need enough overlap of slices in order to get it completely in focus from tip to tip. The average is about 40 images. The most it's ever taken me is about 90. But the thing is, these have to be photographed handheld in the freezing cold and making sure that you're moving linearly towards and away from the snowflake without any deviation. It's not possible. There's going to be some deviation. And so the software that tries to put it together tries to connect all of those lines perfectly. They never fit. So you have to manually go through every single line of a snowflake that is basically infinite geometry and make sure that all of them connect together properly. Because across one to the next, it might take me, I don't know, sometimes 20 minutes to go across one slide, all right? The snowflake has 45 of them. I'm gonna binge watch Netflix while I do this because it becomes muscle memory after a while, like knitting a sweater. I mean, I don't knit, but I can understand that you can do other things while you're doing that task. So yeah, 14 hours, if that was my sole attention, I would have gone insane many snowflakes ago. But yeah, the finished product from that would be something like this. That would be probably a 4 or 5 hour edit on that one. Yeah.
Your ability to find these pictures because of your equipment, or would somebody have this massive with maybe not as quality equipment? For example, a friend has is able to view from my pictures with the location comes on her iPhone.
You don't even need the thing to put onto your iPhone anymore. The new iPhone 13 Pros and the later ones can do it without that. So yes, to your question, you can do it with simple equipment. I have very big, heavy-duty cameras, but I did as an experiment. I got a smaller, still you can change lenses on it, but very, very compact camera that was more budget-friendly. And I shot for at least a year. I think it was a year and a half with just that camera, shooting everything from the water droplets and the snowflakes, and the ultraviolet, and all of those things with that. Because when people would see me with the big, heavy-duty gear, they'd say, look what he's got. He spent $10,000 on camera equipment. What do I have? And so that was a real powerful moment for teaching. Because then when I was doing workshops in person, and I bring out this dainty little thing of a camera, and I show them how powerful it is, immediately everybody felt the power. So yes, you can do it with anything. You might have to make your dollars, point them in the right direction in order to get the proper, adaptive lens or whatever is that particular task. But an ultraviolet flashlight might cost $40. But if you don't have it, you can't explore that entire thing. But any camera can do it. Yeah.
How many external hard drives do you have? I've been telling tax.
I have a network attached storage array with 12 drives in it, and they're all 12 terabyte drives, and I have it half filled. So that's it's a lot of data. I mean, you're shooting all of this stuff raw. The biggest one is when I'm shooting for documentary films, and I'm shooting in 4K or 8K raw, and you have to shoot the same thing 100 times, and the director's going to choose the best one. I don't have the internet bandwidth to upload the data. I actually offload it onto a hard drive and physically mail it to them because it just takes up way too much space. So yeah, lots of drives. Any other questions? Come on, one more. Think of some. Jamie in the back.
I'm curious, you've done a lot. Is there a moment in your career or a project that you worked on when you came to that realization or that aha moment that I've made it? This is what I do when I do that?
There was a few aha moments. One of them was the first time that I decided to attend Campin Fest. And I'd done it for almost a decade straight. The first year, I had somebody that bought one of my iconic images to hang up in a classroom in the northern Northwest Territories. And that image, I didn't put it in this presentation because it was talking about other things, but if you've ever seen an image of red maple leaves placed on a bed of snow in the shape of the Canadian flag, that's my shot. Also my most stolen image, which is why you might have seen it before. But it was printed on canvas, and they were bringing it up there to represent Canada. And that for me was a big moment. I made my booth fees back on Camping Fest that year and decided to keep going back again and again. And there was a couple of moments along the way where, you question whether or not this is the right path. The first book that I produced, the entire first production run had to be completely scrapped because all of the pages were wavy because they used the wrong printing technology. They used a web press versus a sheet fed press. And I'm not going to go into printing tech right now, but it was the wrong choice. And I had to go up to a multi-million-dollar corporation and threaten an open letter to everybody that had publicly backed the book that their books will be flawed because of the printer refusing to own up their mistake. And they finally agreed to reprint it so long as I would pay the cost difference, which was not small. And I had almost no money at the time and had to fork out $15,000 from nothing to fix that problem in order to save my reputation. And I did, and it was a huge success. And that book was then bought by a producer at CBC, who then brought me on to film an episode of The Nature of Things. And it spirals in the good directions as well as the bad directions, sometimes off of the same event. So yes, there was a lot of pivotal moments. One of the big ones that I think made a lasting difference for me was when I photographed the snowflakes, and I learned that teachers were bringing up my posts in their classrooms because I wouldn't just post the snowflakes. I'd write about the science as to how they form, and the teachers were reading that to their students. And I'm like, I'm not qualified for that. But then somehow I was, because I was doing that. And then a professor at the University of Montreal got in touch with me. And he said, Don, you seem to know what you're talking about. No, I don't. We want you to come and speak to the University of Montreal physics cohort. So I went to the University of Montreal to speak to students, physics students, about snowflake physics. And all of the faculty arrived to witness this presentation as well. I succeeded. I did not sound like an idiot, that was the bar I wanted to pass. But I heard from some of the faculty afterwards, they said, yeah, you're not approaching it from a physicist's theoretical perspective, you're approaching it from a practical observational perspective and making correct assumptions along the way. And they had never seen that approach before. So yeah, there's a few of them. There was a question here as well.
I was just wondering if your daughter ever helps you with your experiments.
Oh, she loves it. I mean, sometimes though, if I'm dealing with delicate water droplets and the ultraviolet lights which can hurt your eyes and things like that, I don't necessarily want her always there. But when I'm doing an experiment and showing her like how the milk churns and creates all those colors, oh, she's right there. And I will show her sometimes, even if I'm not trying to create a picture, show her what's on the back of the camera. I'll go out of my studio and she'll say, wow, Daddy, how did you make that? And I'll show her the setup. And no. And how is this that? And then I put the camera back on and she gets this amazed look on her eyes, like I have just showed her the walls of reality falling down. Because at the end of the day, reality is subjective. And you don't usually learn that until much later in life, if you learn it at all. Yes?
Don, what's the next big thing on your wish list? What's on your aspirational list?
That is a huge question. It's always changing because I get ideas and I always have irons in the fire. One right now is to do a lot of time-lapse footage, but to do it in the ultraviolet fluorescence. The thing about that is it's technically difficult. Nobody's ever done it before, where you could have a plant grow up in the fluorescence and then bloom and show you that, and the pollen might be falling out of the flower. The reason why that can't be done easily is because you can't have ultraviolet light on a plant to grow. You have to have a regular light on the plant to grow. And then you have to have that somehow automatically turn off, the ultraviolet lights turn on for the camera to fire, and then switch back to normal. So I have devised an apparatus to do this. There's a lot of MacGyvering of components that have to go together. And I've collected most of them from my storage unit that I'm taking back to Bulgaria with me, and that's going to be one of the next big things, because that could be another opening sequence to a documentary film. And it's stepping into that territory of The ultraviolet one is another fun example because I was shooting a documentary for Discovery called Mosquito. And they brought me in to do some in-depth kind of technical views of mosquitoes spinning around on pins. Any of that footage from that doc is mine. But I got thinking, maybe they glow, maybe they fluoresce. And I showed them a picture of a fluorescing mosquito, a dead one that I found in my sunroom. And their budget for me tripled. And when we went to Brock University to shoot, they have a lab with a lot of the foreign species of mosquitoes under strict controls, and I was in there, and I got free reign to do whatever, because they couldn't make a shot list for me. They didn't know it was possible. That became the title sequence of that documentary. All because I thought, what if I try this, and on a whim, it grows into something so much bigger? So there's a lot of those thoughts in my head right now, and a lot of them will turn into absolutely nothing. But some of them won't. Some of them will actually mature into a proper idea, like the time-lapse fluorescing flower, and it'll go somewhere. But who knows? I might get an idea tomorrow that will blow all of that out of the water. All right, I think that might be the end of the questions. So if anyone wants to sneak something in before Jamie gets here.
Yeah. So this is the point where I give this to you, Don. So we've got a few things in here for Don. Obviously, when you come to Georgian, you get swag to wear when you go back to Bulgaria. Obviously,
I will be representing.
And there is a Georgian logo on the side of that hat.
Is there? Yes, somewhere. And on the mug.
And on the mug. And the other thing that I wanted to share is for many of you in the room, you know that we've been raising funds to support Ukrainian students here at Georgian over the past number of months. And thanks to Johnson Insurance who helped us double the impact as managing gift donor for that. We're approaching $20,000 to support our Ukrainian student bursaries now, and we will be making a donation to the bursary fund as well.
I'm so glad. Thank you very much.
So on that note, that concludes this edition of our Alumni Speaker Series. Thanks for coming out, everybody. For those of you at home, thanks for watching. We will share out a copy of this recording at a later date. And until then, safe trip home, safe time logging off.